Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about the role that strategic green infrastructure can play in managing urban air pollution for improved public health. And in terms of managing urban air pollution, I'm really talking about reducing exposure to road transport pollution. I'd just like to say that though I'm presenting this work, it's done with Rob McKenzie, Director of the University of Birmingham's Institute of Forest Research, and acknowledge the NERC and Transport for London for financial support and help in kind with this work. How important is air pollution? Well, according to the World Health Organization, air pollution is the biggest environmental risk to human health. And it claims approximately 3 million lives each year worldwide, and in the UK alone of the order of 50,000. And in terms of our urban population, worldwide, 90% of people that live in cities that exceed the WHO's air quality guidelines. So how about the science? Where do we stand so far as the influence of vegetation on urban air pollution is concerned? Well, I want to start with this excellent report prepared by the Air Quality Expert Group for DEFRA and the devolved authorities, published, I think, in July last year. What this report says, I'd like to say, is that strategic green infrastructure has a significant role to play in this area, but it's not what you might first suppose. Many of you will be aware that some pollutants can be deposited to leaf surfaces. And this is beneficial insofar as it acts, because it's acting to remove pollution. Once you've removed it, you've improved air quality locally and downwind. But at the scale of realistic urban planting schemes, vegetation removes only a few % of pollution. The good news and the significant leverage that strategic green infrastructure can have for public health in this arena of air quality is in controlling the distribution of pollution, not adding to it or removing it significantly, but controlling its distribution relative to people. This is about controlling its dispersion. And what do I mean by dispersion? I mean collectively. The transport of pollution from where it's emitted. In terms of road transport, we're talking not only about the exhaust from vehicles, but the road wear on tyres and brakes, which are actually significant sources of the very finest particles that are most harmful to human health and which won't be reduced upon electrification of vehicles. But in terms of dispersion, it's the transport of those pollutants, and as they're transported further away from their sources, that highly polluted air is mixed with the somewhat cleaner surrounding air, and the concentrations of pollutants drop off with distance. And why is this important? Well, in terms of its public health impact, what matters are the concentrations of pollutants at point of exposure. We absolutely need to first and foremost reduce the emissions of pollution, but let's also reduce the public's exposure to what is emitted. This is a further means of reducing its public health impact, improving public health outcomes. I'd like to use this, I think, absolutely beautiful photograph by Danny Green of a murmuration of starlings just to talk a little bit more about the role of dispersion, the role of green infrastructure in diverting polluted air, controlling its distribution relative to people. It's not a magical or mysterious thing. We're talking about the same effect, in a sense, as a vegetation barrier that attenuates noise, or why sheep gather behind a hedge to protect themselves from weather upwind. As polluted air is forced up and around a vegetation barrier, under the right wind conditions, you can create a small sheltered region in its immediate wake, which is largely bypassed by the polluted air. It's on this basis that the Air Quality Expert Group, in the report I mentioned a moment ago, explained that actually vegetation barriers in the right circumstances can as much as halve the concentrations of pollutants only in their immediate wake. Move a number of meters further downwind, there's no effect. We're talking about controlling the distribution of pollution, not removing it, but it can be significant in very localized areas. And if we can put the right green infrastructure in the right places to create these sheltered areas where people are predominantly located in our streets, we can have a significant impact on public health. So in this cartoon, I really just want to say, no one size fits all. We absolutely have to consider local urban form, the prevailing wind direction, and we have to think about what receptors, what groups of people, where are we seeking to protect? Who are we prioritizing in protecting? On the left-hand side of this figure, if I take you from the top left and the prevailing wind, it's blowing in from left to right, and around a building, what it does is create a vortex of air in its immediate wake, which actually at street level is acting to pull polluted air from vehicles towards pedestrians on the left-hand side as pictured. Now, in putting in a really thick, dense hedge, it has to be quite tall, it's got to be above head height, so we're talking 2 meters, and there are lots of practical reasons why this is not easy to do, but where we can do this, we can increase the distance that the polluted air must travel from its source to the receptor, to the people pictured left of the hedge. And in so doing, we're reducing the concentrations of pollution those people are exposed to. On the right-hand side of this, of the car, putting in a thick hedge of the same sort will have some benefit, but less benefit, because that vortex of air created as the prevailing wind blows over the top of a building, it's actually already tending to pull the air away from the people towards the vehicles. But of course, there'll be times when the wind isn't blowing in the direction of the prevailing wind. We want to think about who we're trying to protect. On the right-hand side, we've got these little cyclists, but we could equally think about vulnerable receptors such as children in a school playground adjacent to the road. And if we're seeking to protect people further from the road, we need to put that vegetation barrier closer to those people that we're prioritising protection, because it's in its immediate wake that you offer greatest protection. Now, to some extent, the distance you can protect downwind does scale with barrier height under the right wind conditions. So we can also look at increasing the height of a vegetation barrier. And we're talking simply about augmenting a hedge that blocks transport of pollution at a low level with a dense line of trees that acts to block the transport of pollution at a higher level. Now, in some cases, the scenario that's attracted much discussion of dense avenues of trees, I'm really talking about really dense avenues of trees, where we're packing in the trees so tightly that they form a near continuous canopy. The site-specific conditions are all important. If we're talking about a really deep and or narrow street canyon, buildings either side, that's highly trafficked, so we've got intense sources of pollution at street level, we can't avoid the fact that putting in a really dense canopy of trees is to the disbenefit of air quality at street level. What we're doing is reducing the exchange of air between air at that lower level that's highly polluted from the vehicles with the somewhat cleaner air above the surrounding buildings. And we're acting to trap the emissions from vehicles so as they can accumulate to higher concentrations. But I think what's often missed is the role that that same really dense avenue of trees could play for the benefit of people one street away. Here, it could provide really effective protection from polluted air aloft, the overspill of pollution from a heavily trafficked street canyon into, let's say, a residential road, where on average receptors may be of higher vulnerability. The people living there may spend longer in that environment. And in the process, we can create clean green corridors that have further benefits in incentivizing active transport, creating attractive places in which to live. I want to stress that the disbenefit in a polluted street canyon and the benefit in a road carrying little or no traffic is only relevant where we're putting trees in so tightly they form this near continuous canopy. In any other situation where trees are more widely spaced or scattered trees, the truth is, for air quality, they'll actually have negligible impact for good or ill, but they will deliver many further benefits, of which I'm preaching to the converted. But we've got to name thermal comfort, biodiversity, sustainable urban drainage, great placemaking for business, for recreation. Okay, so street trees are incredibly valuable, but we have to be objective about where they're of benefit and disbenefit. And in moving from the scientific evidence base in the Air Quality Expert Group's report towards guidance and policy, we've just, with the Greater London Authority, written a 20-page guide, detailed guidance on the strategic use of green infrastructure in this regard, and this should be published this week, so keep your eyes open. How about in terms of policy? At the topmost level, DEFRA is calling in its 25-year environment plan for new developments to demonstrate environmental net gain. One tier down, at the level of a large combined regional authority, the Greater London Authority, in its next London plan, it's proposing a new air quality positive policy. But to demonstrate at planning that a proposal is going to deliver environmental net gain or air quality positive impacts, we need to quantitatively predict at planning what the impacts of a proposal will be. Now, in terms of green infrastructure and exposure to roadside air quality, existing platforms focus and are available with which to focus on and make it possible to quantify the minor benefits, the very minor benefits of deposition of pollution to vegetation in the urban environment. But what we're developing at the University of Birmingham is something new, something different. This is a software platform with which to quantitatively predict at planning the impacts of site-specific green infrastructure interventions on our exposure to road transport pollution. The platform is designed to inform and facilitate pre-app discussions between developers or the environmental consultants they employ to produce air quality assessments accompanying their planning applications, and the local authority officers determining the outcomes of those planning applications. So you can cast your eyes over the organisations that are partnered in this project on the left. What I want to stress is this platform is going to be available to all, and it's going to be free to use to maximise uptake. Now, to ensure it's fit for purpose, we're co-designing it with those partner organisations. Importantly, included in those are CERC, Cambridge Environmental Research Consultants, and AA Ricardo to the bottom left, who are not only environmental consultants, but they are commercial providers of air quality platforms with which local authorities across the country are already familiar. So they're involved in this project not just as representative of one of the target end user groups, but to look at whether or not they can roll in the developments we make together into their commercial platforms. And our platform, this green infrastructure for roadside air quality platform, will be based on open source code, so it will be available to all to rope in, further innovate on. We hope it will stimulate further innovation in all sectors, public, private, civil, third. So the take-home messages. I think we have to avoid the message that green infrastructure is always good for air quality. We have to be objective about where it is and where it isn't. But I'd like to say that the right green infrastructure in the right location can be very effective at controlling the distribution of pollution and thereby reducing the public's exposure to it. I think it's really important also not to reduce down the messages. I think there are two key messages, not to conflate these to say that green infrastructure, well, it can remove some pollution, but it isn't a silver bullet. Because I would say that green infrastructure does not efficiently remove pollution at the scale of realistic urban planting schemes, but that used strategically, it can be highly effective at controlling its distribution and thereby reducing the public's exposure to it. So, final two messages. First and foremost, we must reduce emissions of pollution at source. but let's also reduce exposure to what is emitted. We can further improve public health thereby. And when we're looking to prioritise interventions, let's focus not only on where the concentrations of pollutants are highest, but where they combine with the most vulnerable receptors, the very young, the very old, those with pre-existing medical conditions, where large numbers of people are exposed for long lengths of time. When we prioritise based on all those factors combined, we not only make the interventions where they'll deliver greatest benefit for public health, we also act to reduce inequalities in public health outcomes. There are countless examples across our major cities, whether it be London, Birmingham, where I'm affiliated to the university, Liverpool, Manchester, where I was born, Liverpool, where I'm engaging with the Mersey Forest and so forth, where the most deprived communities get hit hardest. They tend to live in areas of worse air quality, and they tend to exhibit higher instances of the pre-existing medical conditions that render them more vulnerable to its impact. Let's act in these locations to reduce inequalities in health outcomes. Green infrastructure, strategic green infrastructure, has a significant part to play in this. Thank you.